In the first 5 videos of this series, I presented a lot of information about the digestive system. In this one, I'd like to take that information and put it all together so that you see the whole thing at once rather than a bit here and a bit there and a bit there. So in this digestive system summary, I'd like to start by reminding us that the digestive system is nothing more than a tube that goes through the body. It's a muscular tube. And in this diagram, I'm representing the mouth here, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine or the colon. Remember, this muscular tube has 4 layers, the serosa on the outside, the muscularis, the submucosa, and the mucosa. And that set of 4 tissue layers goes through the whole system. The muscularis itself has 2 parts in the whole system, but in the stomach, remember, there's a 3rd layer of muscles. So looking at it from the outside going in, if this is the outside, this is the lumen on the inside, here we have the longitudinal muscles, the circular muscles that exist throughout the entire system, and we have the transverse muscles which exist only in the stomach. Another component of the muscular nature of this is the presence of sphincters. There are 4 different sphincters in the digestive system. The first one is right here. There's another one here. There's another one here. And the last one, the anal sphincter, is here. So we have the cardiac sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, ileocecal valve, and the anal sphincter. As a muscular tube, this set of muscles is designed so that it squeezes the material as it travels along, so that you have peristalsis, basically forcing it to move throughout that distance. These sphincters control the flow. So this one will close, preventing it from going this way or that way, and so on like that. Another thing we did to this system is we added some accessory organs, and I'll just add those accessory organs here. First part of the small intestine, we have an attachment to the liver, and we have an attachment to the pancreas. These accessory organs each do something for digestion, and we'll cover in more detail a little bit later on in this video exactly all the roles of the pancreas and all the roles of the liver. But remember, there are 6 roles of the liver, and there are 6 things that the pancreas produces. One of the other components of our discussions that we've had already is the changing of the names of the food material as it goes through the system. We put food in here, in the mouth, and feces comes out. 2 names. And it changes all the way along. As we swallow it, the name of food is no longer used. We now call it bolus. In the stomach, it's acid chyme because of the acidic nature of the material. In the intestines, it's chyme. And as it gets dehydrated by the absorption of water in the large intestine, it gradually becomes feces. Another thing that happens to the material as it goes through is it actually changes pH. When we put the food in our mouth, I would suggest that the pH usually is somewhere close to 7. Sure, we eat some acidic foods, dill pickles and things like that, but by and large, the material in our mouth stays pretty close to 7. Salivary amylase would work best at a fairly neutral pH. In the stomach, the pH is 2, or around 2. In the small intestine, the pH is around 8.3. The requirement to change the pH has to do with the function of the enzymes themselves. Pepsin, which works in the stomach, has an optimum pH for its function at about 2. The enzymes that function in the small intestine, and there's many of them, all function at about 8.3. The feces at the other end, I would suggest that by and large the feces is probably fairly close to 7 as well. And it would be fairly uncomfortable if it was acidic or basic. I think we should consider physical digestion as a separate topic before we get to looking at the chemical digestion processes. In terms of physical digestion, there were 3 areas or 3 regions where physical digestion occurred. One of them is in the mouth. Chewing is a physical digestive step because what it did is it increased the surface area, physically increasing the surface area of the food components. Physical digestion occurred in the stomach as well. A churning action tends to increase that surface area as well. So that's a physical digestion step. And the third physical digestion step occurs right here. Because if you can remember, the liver makes bile. Bile gets stored in the gallbladder and released into the intestine, into the duodenum, and that emulsifies fat droplets, or fat into droplets. That's emulsification is a physical digestion step. So we have 3 regions where there's physical digestion occurring. Chemical digestion is a much bigger topic, and to get through that one, I think I'm going to have to take this off the board. I'll summarize the chemical digestion of each of the types of food. So in terms of carbohydrates, I'll just call it starch. What you should remember is that there are 3 steps to the complete chemical digestion of starch. The first one occurs in the mouth, where starch is broken into maltose. That's the role of salivary amylase. So this occurs in the mouth. I'll put that over here, mouth. The second step, or second part of the chemical digestion of starch, still has starch as a molecule, because not all the starch gets broken down in the mouth. Pancreatic amylase does that one. This occurs in the duodenum. And now we have maltose. Maltose gets broken apart by maltase, and we have glucose molecules. That occurs also in the mouth. Oh, sorry, that occurs in the duodenum. We could add the other little bits here. pH consideration here is about 7. pH for these 2 is around 8.3. The digestion of protein also occurs in 3 steps. What we have starting in the stomach, protein, is broken into polypeptides by pepsin. Remember the pH in the stomach, we're around 2. pH of 2. The polypeptides have to be broken apart. Into smaller pieces, peptides. Peptides could be 1 amino acid already, but it could be 2 or 3 amino acids long. This is trypsin that does this. And then the peptides have to be broken apart. And they get broken into individual amino acids. And that ends the digestion of protein. Amino acids are small enough to be absorbed. Glucose up here is small enough to be absorbed. These are peptidases, these enzymes. Just to finish this process here occurs in the duodenum at a pH of around 8.3. This also occurs in the duodenum. Just want to point out one more thing that we mentioned in the other video. Pepsin, trypsin, those are enzymes, although they don't end in ASE. Those are what we call zymogen enzymes. They're produced in inactive forms and activated by a chemical step when they get to their destination. The digestion of lipids, make some space for myself here. Those each have 3 steps. It's an easy way to remember them. If you remember starch, there's 3 chemical steps. Protein, there's 3 chemical steps. Lipids, I always like to think of it in 2 steps. Although one of them is not chemical, one of them is a physical step. That's this one. Fat droplets, this is a physical step. So I want to make sure we note that. This is done by bile. That's the process of emulsification. It occurs in the duodenum. The pH is irrelevant here because it's not an enzyme. Bile is not an enzyme. But what it does do is it increases the surface area of these the fat bits. So we have fat droplets. Lipase enzyme. Fatty acids, and glycerol as a product. This is an enzyme, ASE ending, that occurs in the duodenum. Nucleic acid digestion, 2 steps, starting with nucleic acids. They get broken into their unit molecules or monomers, which are nucleotides. These are nuclease enzymes. Now I put an S on here, nucleases. There's several different types of nucleases. The nucleotides cannot be absorbed. They have to be broken down into their components, which are the base, sugars, and phosphate ions. All of these processes occur in the duodenum. I should mention that some of these nucleases come from the pancreas, other ones come from the small intestine. So there's, like I say, there's a variety of them. Oh, and this enzyme here, nucleotidases. So there you have it. That's the complete chemical digestion process. 3 reactions involving starch, 3 with protein, 1 chemical step with lipids, 2 chemical steps with nucleic acids. Another thing that I'd like to consider before we leave this whole process is some links to health concerns or health issues. Let me quickly just put the digestive system back up here. Health concerns in the stomach. Sometimes there's ulcers. The stomach produces a lot of mucus which covers the inside surface here. The purpose of the mucus is to protect the stomach. It also provides water for hydrolysis, for hydrolytic reactions. The mucus protects the stomach from the low pH, from the hydrochloric acid. But what happens is there's a bacterium that happens to live in the mucus here, and its name is Helicobacter pylori. And if Helicobacter pylori actually can proliferate enough in here and the mucus lining gets weakened, it can affect the stomach wall itself and cause some bleeding. That's an ulcer, when you have an open sore on the inside wall of the stomach. We did mention the liver and the gallbladder. We represent the gallbladder like this today. It contains bile. And what I said about bile is that it's a green, salty liquid. Salt crystallizes. And what can happen is you can get crystals of bile forming inside here. And that can plug the tubes. That can be quite uncomfortable. These crystals of bile are called gallstones. Another thing that can happen in the digestive system, if we look at the appendix, that vestigial structure, I took quite large here, but things can get caught in the appendix. It's still a little sac-like structure, so things can get caught up in here. Well, the kind of material that gets caught here is stuff that we don't want to look at. If it gets caught in here and there's bacteria in here, the bacteria can continue to reproduce and you can get an infection in here as appendicitis. And it gets too swollen and too red, it could burst. If it were to burst, you'd have the fecal material spreading inside the body cavity, which would be quite awful. Another thing that can happen along the digestive tract is you can get too much water, too little water being absorbed out of the colon. The colon's specialized to absorb water, but if you get too much water being absorbed, constipation results. If there's too little water being absorbed, you'll get diarrhea forming. Another thing that I think we should touch on before we leave the digestive system is the links to the other systems in the body. This deals with the movement of food and the extraction of nutrients from the food, but it doesn't work in isolation. It also has to have the circulatory system associated with it, because in here, where the villi are, this is where the circulatory system plays its role. Because the nutrients, with the exception of the fat nutrients, they go into the circulatory system. The lymphatic system is related here because the fat nutrients go into the lymphatic system. The circulatory system is also related because in total there are 3 hormones that are involved in the digestion. We have gastrin for the release of gastric acid, we have CCK and secretin. Well, hormones go into the blood and they get circulated around in the blood. So there's another connection to the circulatory system there. There's a connection to the muscles, obviously. There's a muscular tube. There's connections to the nervous system because there are mechanoreceptors in here. Mechanoreceptors, what triggers the gastrin release. There are chemoreceptors in here. Those are specialized nerve endings. It's connected to the urinary system because we actually excrete something here. Remember, one of the functions of the liver was to take apart dead red blood cells, and it produces those 2 proteins, bilirubin and biliverdin, which produce the green pigment in the bile. Those are metabolic wastes. As metabolic wastes, they get put into here and they get excreted out the anus. We have to be very careful. We never call getting rid of feces excretion. This is defecation. or elimination. However, there is that one instance in here, that one type of metabolic product which is excreted out the anus. There's another connection to the excretory system, and it has to do with another function of the liver. The liver makes urea. Remember, the body made the ammonia. Ammonia is quite toxic. The liver makes urea. Urea gets put into the blood, travels around the circulatory system, and is removed by the kidneys. That's excretion that way. Now, before we leave the digestive system, I want to bring your minds back to the liver and the pancreas. I said we'd touch on that before we leave it. Both of these accessory organs have 6 functions. I'll put an L for liver. The liver has 6 functions. It detoxifies blood. Destroys red blood cells, dead red blood cells. It makes urea, makes bile, it makes globulins, and it stores glucose. Like the liver, there's 6 things to remember with the pancreas. It produces 6 things. I'll put 4 of them here because there's 4 enzymes. It also produces water. And bicarbonate ions. These 4 enzymes, there's trypsinogen, there's lipase, nucleases, and amylase, pancreatic amylase. That's the digestive consideration. Pancreas is also well known for the 2 hormones that it produces. So we have insulin and glucagon. And maybe it's worth just mentioning one more little thing before we leave this topic completely, and that's the lacteal structure. The lacteals are those finger-like projections on the inside of the small intestine. They have a circulatory system that forms a capillary bed inside them. So the arterial blood comes in, the venular blood takes the materials out, and that is surrounding a lacteal. The lacteal is part of the lymphatic system. The lacteal is on the inside here. And most nutrients get absorbed into the circulatory system, except the fat products, they get absorbed into the lacteal. So I think that's the end of our summary of the digestive system. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more about my presentations on biology topics, be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much.